Hey guys, I'm here to talk about everyone's favorite topic right now, Frost Mage Buffs. We did it. We collectively complained loudly enough that Blizzard heard us, heard that the spec was underperforming, and lots of other specs were underperforming as well. And they did something I haven't seen them do very often, and that is essentially a mid-tier buff of underperforming specs. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm kind of surprised that Blizzard did this. I personally, I've played this game. I've played Frost Mage for a very long time, 16 years, and in my experience, like I don't pretend to have any insight into how they approach class balance or anything like that. All I can speak to is what I've seen over 16 years of playing this game, and usually once the season, the tier has begun, they don't really like to mess with things too much. They like to keep players kind of establish the meta, if you will, and Blizzard doesn't really like to mess with that. And the fact that they've made this gesture of buffing the underperforming specs is really nice, and 9% is actually huge. So you know, it's not going to put us above fire. Nothing is like that's what I'm talking about. Nothing is going to change the meta. People have already chosen fire as the meta for pushing keys, world first race, things like that. They're not going to mess with that. They never have and they never will. But the fact that they are throwing us some buffs is a nice gesture. And everybody's asking the same thing. Where is this going to put us? Now, first thing I have to say is they are, testing these buffs internally. So technically, what we see next Tuesday, on server reset, might not necessarily be actual 9%. They might decide 9% is too much and they might tone it back. But we do have, fortunately, we do have recent precedents for changes like this. After Castle Nathria had been out for a week, they buffed a few specs. I think Assassination Rogue got like 5%, and they did the exact same thing. They announced it earlier in the week, before the weekend, and then the changes that went live the following Tuesday were exactly the same numbers. They didn't end up changing anything. So it might not end up being 9%, but I'm going to assume at this point in time that it will be. Now, some of you may have read the comments on Wowhead that Preheat made about this change, saying, there's some wonky math in there with the way that they calculate overall spec damage. So when they're tuning in beta, they have a lot of like levers they can tweak. They can tweak the individual damage of Ice Lance, and then they can tweak the individual damage of Frostbolt, and all things like that. And they usually do that like throughout the beta. And at the end, they kind of have everything in a proportion that they want. So, like, if they want, Ice Lance to be like 40% of your damage, they tweak little things, individual spells until they get there. And then at the very end, usually what they do is they have this thing called the spec aura, and this affects all damage that you deal. And this is why some of the shared spells we have, right? So like all Frost, Fire, Arcane, all have Arcane Explosion now, right? But that spec aura is why you're gonna see different damage values for, let's say, Arcane Explosion or Fire Blast or whatever between each spec, because each spec has a different number on their damage aura. And at the end of beta, they set ours to negative 19%. So if you tally up the damage that all the spells do, we would be here, and then they reduce that by 19%. So essentially we're doing 81% of the damage we should be doing. So it does depend how they calculate this 9%, because when they just say, "Oh, we're increasing all damage by 9%," we don't actually know if that means that they're changing the aura from negative 19% up to, let's say, 10%. Because if they did that, technically that would be an 11% upgrade damage boost. Because if we started at 81% of our potential damage and we went to 90%, that's just how the math works out. 90 over 81 is 1.1111. So essentially 11% upgrade, which is exactly what Preheat was talking about in his comments on that Wowhead article. And the shorter answer is that we don't know exactly how they're going to code it until it goes live. We know how they've explained it, but there's been times in the past where that didn't necessarily line up with exactly how the underlying code worked out. So, hey, if it ends up being like an effective 11% buff, great. Obviously great. But if it's actually 9%, if they got out the calculator and figured out how much it would tweak the aura to get us to a net change of 9%, whatever. I'm going to do my math here, presuming that it is actually just 9%. And if it ends up being better than that, great. We'll go from there. So, like I said, people keep asking, where is this going to put us? Where are we going to fall out in the grand scheme of things among all the DPS specs in the game? And like I said, Blizzard isn't going to drastically upset the balance. Everyone's already chosen Fire for their meta for pushing keys and for raid tier and things like that. They're not going to make Fire no longer the best spec. Fire will absolutely still be the best overall spec for this tier this season. Period. However, in a nutshell, this is going to take Frost from pretty low in the pack to, on average, about middle of the pack. I think there will be one, maybe two fights in this raid tier where we will actually excel over Fire. And that's something I appreciate because, mages always love to be on the top of the damage meters, right? I mean, a lot of DPS classes do, but I feel like mages especially. And personally, I have no problem with not being the best at everything. What I appreciate is when all of the specs have a little bit different niche and they're balanced well enough so that on this fight, you want a couple more Frost Mages. If you have a couple on the bench and you're progressing on this fight, Frost Mages are really good for this fight, so we're going to bring in an extra Frost Mage or two. But on the next fight, maybe Fire's just better. And, fight design usually works out like that. But the way that they were balanced at Shadowlands launch and when the raid opened is that Frost wasn't the best at anything. So Frost's niche, and we kept hearing about this like over and over before Shadowlands came out, when people thought that Frost was going to be the best spec for this raid tier, is that Frost is the kings of two target sustained cleave. On a fight that's designed around two target sustained cleave, no one is supposed to be able to touch Frost. And that didn't happen because of numbers tuning. So, where I think this is all going to fall out, Fire's still going to be the best overall spec for this raid. But on the fights that favor sustained cleave, especially Huntsman, I think we are going to be the best. Not by a very big margin. It's going to be close. Like, Fire and Frost will be competitive, I think. So, anybody hoping, Frost is going to be the best spec now, please just don't get your hopes up. Because even if we get 9%, even if we get 11%, we're not going to be there. We are probably going to be, on average, about middle of the pack with 1 to 2 fights where we excel. And I'm totally happy with that. Now, I'm going to do my best to compare for you guys using Warcraft logs, using actual data, numbers from actual players, to attempt to kind of quantify where Frost Mages are right now and where they could potentially be after this buff. So we're going to look at Warcraft logs. And a couple caveats here. There's really not a lot of Frost Mages in Mythic. So where I would normally love to use, numbers from Mythic, because that's the eventual goal for most players, right? I mean, a lot of players, they're happy, rating at Heroic. But I think most people would like to eventually progress and see Mythic and get Cutting Edge and all that. But there's really not enough of us in Mythic to kind of utilize those statistics. So I'm gonna stick to Heroic here. And one thing that I personally believe kind of skews the numbers. So when you look at this statistics page, and we'll go to heroic. And let's go to max. So with max, we are talking about the absolute best pars ever recorded on a given fight in heroic. And Frost is all the way down here. So even the best Frost players in the world were only capable of getting here. But in my opinion, these numbers are kind of skewed because this is all item levels, right? But if all the world first raiders, all the big mythic progression guilds are switching to fire and pumping up their fire mages, and you can see this if you look through the logs, but highest ranked fire mages in here are like approaching like 225 item level, because they're getting a lot of gear out of mythic. Most people who are progressing through mythic are playing fire, and they're just not playing frost. So frost mages aren't gearing up. They're not, getting a bunch of mythic gear, and so that kind of skews this number a little bit. And if you go and look at, the top, the all stars on heroic, and you scroll through some of these fights, a lot of the best frost mages on here are at like 212, 210, 213. There is a 216 in there, 210, 214, etc. Whereas if you look at fire mages, yeah, we've got guys 221, 223, 223, etc. So I'm not going to compare fire is already so far ahead of frost. I'm not going to compare a 225 fire mage to a 211 frost mage because it's going to make the discrepancy between them look way worse than it actually is. I mean, it's already bad enough, trust me. So I like to approach it from this angle. What if we all had equivalent gear? What if there were frost mages going in mythic progression? What if we were actually getting gear? What if we were all relatively, roughly equivalent item level? And so you can do that on Warcraft Logs statistics. We can go over here to the stats page. We're looking at heroic, max, so the best players, like what the absolute top of what the spec is capable of, and using DPS. But you can also set item level. So I've already looked into, how many parses there are at each item level and all kinds of things like that. But the vast majority of players playing Frost, logging raids, etc., is around 210 in heroic right now. So, just to kind of get an equivalent idea between Frost and Fire, we're going to start there. Now, obviously, you can see for the past several weeks, Frost has been down here. An average of about 5167 DPS per fight. At, again, the absolute top of what the spec is capable of. The best players. Fire's up here around 6200. Frost is down here around 5100. So obviously they were over 1000 DPS ahead of us. Best case scenario. But if we take 5167 times 1.09, let's just say it's only 0.9% or 9%, 5632. So if before we were doing 5167 and we went up 9%, we should be doing about 5632. If we did exactly the same thing, those spells would hit that much harder and we would have done 5632. So that's pretty much right around here. That's right around Enhancement Shaman, which, again, as I said, is pretty much middle of the pack. It's still nowhere near Fire. And it's not going to be. But let's look at, like I was saying, Huntsman Altamore. Frost is actually already pretty decent on that fight. It's not actually that far behind Fire. So if we apply the same logic to that, let's see, Frost is at 7335 times 1.09, 7995, which actually puts it up here, third, right below Affliction and Balanced Druid, which is phenomenal. Even if we have one fight in this raid where we just really, really stand out, I am more than happy with that after being, uh, you know, a lot of people have gotten, the talk from their raid leader or guild master or what have you saying, yeah, either you need to switch to fire or we need to bench you. We can't afford to take a frost mage. And like that's been a reality for a lot of you for the past, few weeks. And I think this will help a lot. Um, Obviously, this is the one fight that's really like perfectly suited for Frost Mage in this raid. But even if we can really stand out on one fight and be kind of middle of the pack on the rest of the fights, then you have some room to make that up by being an exceptional player. I mean, as a raid leader, especially in Mythic progression, yes, it's true. You only have a very limited 20 raid slots, and a lot of these guilds run a bench of 25, 26 maybe players. And you frequently have to make decisions about who's getting the raid spot and who's getting set. And even if the person is like a top 1% level player, if their class is only capable of this much damage down here, the Affliction Warlock might only be an average player, but he can pretty much, roll his face across the keyboard and still do more damage than that phenomenal Assassination Rogue. So it puts us back in a position where we're kind of middle of the pack. Exceptional players are going to be able to stand out. And I think that's a great place to be in. I'm really happy with that, honestly. And so that's really my thoughts in a nutshell on how this buff is shaping up for us. I hope that those of you who want to raid, want to do mythic progression, but you were kind of, you know, in a hard position because of where the spec was at, maybe you were asked to play fire, you don't like fire, you're not good at fire, whatever the case may be. I hope that those of you who are in that situation now have a little more leeway to excel and like prove yourself as a frost player, and even if you play perfectly you're not still going to be bottom of the barrel. To sum it up, again, I don't think this change is going to be enough to upset the balance of where things stand. Fire is going to be the best spec. It's the best spec right now and it's going to stay the best spec after Tuesday. That's not going to change, but I do believe that this frost buff is enough that excellent, exceptional players of Frost Mage will be able to stand out. They will have that opportunity. And hopefully, the extremely negative WoW community perception of Frost Mages for the past several weeks starts to slowly change a little bit as Frost Mages are able to get out there and show that they can do good damage. They can pump. But that's pretty much it, guys. I have a couple more videos in the works. You should be seeing pretty soon. One thing I'm going to do is a quick summary of talents and legendary choice and how to approach Mythic Plus, because I see a lot of questions in the Mage Discord every single day about should I use Freezing Rain or should I use Slick Ice on Tyrannical Weeks. I'm going to do a video that covers all of that in just a few minutes. So be looking out for that. A project that I'm going to be working on soon is a commentary video of all the fights in heroic Castle Nathria. So now that we're getting buffs, a lot of us might be getting more raid spots, and obviously we want to be able to do as much damage as possible as a mage. Mage's role in a raid is to do damage. So especially after we've been in such a bad place for weeks and we just got a pretty substantial buff, if we get that raid slot as a frost mage, we want to be able to prove that we deserve it, that we can earn that raid slot, right? So I've gotten like a 98 on pretty much every boss in Heroic Castle Nathria at this point, and I want to go through and do a commentary video that shows just little tips and tricks you can use on each fight to squeak out a little bit more damage here and there. So be looking out for that soon. If you have any questions about anything that I've covered here, anything that you think I didn't quite answer, anything you'd like to see me cover, please, by all means, hit me up in the comments below on the Mage Discord Frost channel, on my own Discord, or on my Twitch stream. Absolutely anytime. You guys drive the content that I make, so whatever you guys want to see, let me know.